Hello everyone, thanks for joining me. Today we will be talking about the Romantic era Swedish composer Elfrida Andrée. Be sure to tune in on Saturday, March 27th at 7:30 p.m. to hear the Berks Sinfonietta strings play her Serenade for string orchestra, which was originally written for string quartet. We'll talk more about that later. Let's get started. Elfrida Andrée was born in 1841 in the town of Visby, Sweden, which is on the island of Gotland off to the east of the mainland peninsula of Sweden. Elfrida would not only grow up to be an accomplished musician, an organist, composer, and conductor, but she would be equally renowned for being a pioneer of women's rights in Sweden. These two roles were likely cultivated in her nurturing childhood home. She had a close relationship with her father, Andreas Andrée, who was a local physician, a progressive politician, and a profound lover of music who was very aware of the disadvantages women had in society, especially when it came to education. So he would thoroughly advocate for Elfrida and her older sister Fredrika's ambitions. This support came in the form of providing them with a robust liberal arts and musical education. He would pay for her organ lessons, and the town would use their home as a place to gather and play music. At the age of 14, Elfrida would move to Stockholm to study general music classes at the Royal Swedish Academy of Music. She was excluded from the organ classes because women were not allowed, but she was able to take private lessons with the organ teacher there. She also studied composition with Ludwig Norman at the Royal Swedish Academy, and about a decade later, in 1870, she would study composition with Niels Gade in Copenhagen. So those were her two primary composition teachers. But back in 1860, she would become the first woman to pass all her classes and performance exams at the Royal Swedish Academy of Music. From there, it proved to be difficult to put her organ training to good use because of a Swedish law that prohibited women from applying and holding organist jobs. One clergy even believed that the sight of a woman on the organ stool would be indecorous and disruptive of devotion. So Elfrida and her father, along with some liberal members of parliament, advocated for the revision of this law, which eventually succeeded and paved the way for her to get a post at a couple churches in Stockholm in May 1861. Around this time, she and her father were also pushing for equal access in another field, that of telegraph operating and assisting. There was another law prohibiting women to be included in this area. They would eventually achieve that legislative change, and Elfrida would become one of the first women to be a telegraph operator. And by 1880, more women were in the field than men. She was also composing several chamber music works. Her piano quintet in E minor, which was published by the Swedish Art Music Society, brought her much acclaim throughout Sweden and among Swedish composers. In 1867, her life shifted to a new town when she won an organist position at the Göteborg Cathedral in Göteborg. She was the first woman to hold such a prestigious church position, and in fact, she was the first woman in all of Europe to obtain a cathedral organist position, and she would remain there until her death in 1929. Her main duties there would be playing up to 4 services on Sundays while maintaining the condition of the organ, and eventually in 1905, when it was deemed allowed and appropriate, she would conduct the church choir and the congregational singing. She would continue to run into some struggles though, such as when her first symphony was being performed in Stockholm, and afterwards a letter correspondence to her father indicated that she believed the copyists had done a poor job copying down her music, and then the musicians at the performance had purposely played parts incorrectly. Because of this sort of fiasco, she did not receive a great review, and there were comments about the inability of women to write large-scale music. She was not deterred by these comments, though. In fact, she saw large-scale composing as one of her main goals. In a letter to her sister, she said, "The orchestra is an interpreter of the wondrous surgings of my soul." From then on, at times, she would hire the local Göteborg orchestra to read through her pieces while she conducted, and she became one of the first women to conduct an orchestra in Sweden. In 1879, she was elected to the Swedish Academy of Music for her musical accomplishments. When she was allowed by various churches, she would give organ recitals all throughout Europe. She was known to be an outstanding organist who could play music from any era, and she even improvised very well. In the 1890s, she took over the Labor Concerts in Göteborg, which were public concerts designed to draw a large audience. She would organize over 800 of these concerts, and she was often the one conducting the orchestra. And she was a wonderful teacher who trained many accomplished organists, many of whom were women. She would end up writing over 100 works, both chamber and large-scale works, including an orchestral cantata titled Snowfried, a second symphony which gained her much international recognition, 2 organ symphonies, which were for solo organ and brass ensemble, 2 Swedish masses, and an opera entitled Frithiof's Saga, which she completed in collaboration with a good friend of hers, novelist Selma Lagerlöf. Although the opera was never fully performed, Elfrida did compile a suite from the music, and that has since been performed. So as you can tell, Elfrida Andrée was an extremely talented, hardworking, determined woman in music. And although she broke a lot of barriers and wrote a lot of music, unfortunately only a small portion of that music was able to be published during her lifetime. So she probably wasn't as well known as she could have been throughout her life. And of course that fame kind of faded a bit with her death, which is why it's really exciting to talk to you about her life and her accomplishments, and to also share a piece of her music with you, her Serenade in D minor. Elfrida's Serenade for Strings in D minor was originally written for string quartet in D minor in 1887. She would add a string bass part in 1909 without changing any of the original quartet parts, so it is possible that she intended this piece to be played either as a quartet, a quintet, or maybe even expanded to a string orchestra version, even though she never really wrote out an orchestral score. The version you will be hearing from Berks is that orchestral version of the Serenade for Strings, which was fully transcribed and edited by a musicologist who specializes in Elfrida Andrée's work, and his name is Jonathan Spatola Knoll. The work exists in 4 movements, going allegro, andante, allegretto, grazioso, pastoral, and a final allegro. You may notice that the top voice, or the first violin, leads the way on most of the melodies throughout, so kind of listen to how the rest of the ensemble is either supporting them or responding to them. You'll certainly hear the drama and angst that is inherent in Romantic era music and in D minor music. You'll hear that especially in the first and last movement, both the allegros. The middle 2 movements are sweeter and lighter, more dolce. You'll hear spans of music that are in the relative major, F major. The 3rd movement especially is very joyous and jaunty and has a compound meter sway to it. Feels like you're walking through a park or a field. Listen for some surprising tempo changes in that 3rd movement, and in general, listen to the surprising shifts in mood throughout. One particularly poignant one is at the very end of the 4th movement. Instead of ending in a grim D minor, we end in a joyous D major. I imagine that the full orchestration is going to be quite lush compared to the quartet version I was able to find, so I really hope you enjoy. Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed learning about Elfrida Andrée, and maybe you'll go investigate some more of her music. For now, I hope you tune in on Saturday, March 27th at 7:30 p.m. to hear Berks Sinfonietta play her Serenade for Strings. Bye.